Welcome back to our fall edition of our highly valued, beloved conversations with each other.
Oscar buzz. If Oscar does podcast, we're on the Oscar buzz of getting Oscars.
Yes, something like that. So I'm Steve Autrey, the pastor at Denver United Methodist Church, here with my good friend Paul Thompson over at Huntersville United Methodist Church. And as if you've watched this before, you know, we just enjoy hanging out with each other and discussing some of what's going on in our churches. Sometimes we discuss what's going on in the larger denomination, what's coming up on Sundays. Just we get all over the place.
And so today I want to go all over the place because I ran into a video from N.T. Wright. Many of you know N.T. Wright, a leading scholar in the area of New Testament especially. And what he did in this video is worth repeating. It is about salvation, the meaning of salvation, and what's going to happen to us when we die. So I want to invite Steve into the conversation. I think he got a chance to watch the video, but let's talk to our folks a little bit about what N.T. Wright says in that video that I think bears so much repeating. Steve, salvation is not an idea that we escape hell and somehow get to heaven. Let's talk a little bit about what salvation really is.
Well, I remember coming across this challenging quote from Dallas Willard several years ago, where he said that going to heaven isn't the primary purpose of the Christian life.
Wow. Now just reflect on that for a moment. The primary purpose of the Christian life is not getting to heaven. That's a showstopper.
Well, and that would have been, especially in the context I grew up in, that would have been reason enough to kick you out of the church. Mm-hmm. Of course, growing your hair long was reason enough. Listening to rock and roll music, lots of reasons to get kicked out. But no, he goes on to say it happens to be heaven and promises of eternal life, the way he worded it, happen to be a nice side benefit, a benefit of the life. It's there, but the primary purpose of the Christian life is to follow Jesus and be transformed into his person in this world, to take on the attributes of Christ, to, as Paul says in his New Testament writings, to develop the very mind of Christ. So that takes following Jesus from out of this world and places it primarily into the world and locates the following of Jesus in our here and now.
I think in my experience, salvation was always two things. It was salvation from hell. We certainly did not want to go to hell. We wanted to escape that at all costs. That was the one thing. So we were just concerned about that. But secondly was saved from sin. We always felt like salvation was tied up into this sense of how bad I've been, how sorry I am for that, and this real shame and guilt around that. And as it turns out, that's really not what salvation means at all. Now, funny, Steve, I did a sermon one time where I listed 10 things that I think scripturally salvation was, and I intentionally said, and salvation from sin was number 10. I got to number 7, and a lady in the church, audibly, before everybody else, halfway through the sermon, she goes, "What about sin?" And I've got.
You say you were against it?
Okay, I said I am against it, and I don't want to. I don't ever want to encourage you in it, but salvation is so much bigger than, again, saving us from hell or saving us from sin. We've really got to put our minds around what is the meaning of salvation.
It is, again, leading a life that shapes your character, that changes who you are. Now, the forgiveness of sin is huge,
sure,
right? It's a big part of that, but it's not all of it. It's it's like baking a cake. You don't just use sugar, or you don't just use flour, or you don't just use a couple of eggs. You use, of course, you can tell I've never baked a cake, can you?
Let's see, what else goes into
I don't have a clue. Maybe some baking powder.
Yeah,
it takes all of that to get the whole. And I think sometimes especially in Christianity in the American South, which we are very well versed with, that it becomes that the whole thing is one thing. Well, it's just like us as people, we're made up, we're complex. There are many pieces and parts to us that create the whole. And the issue of salvation, there are primarily it's rooted in who Jesus is.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the Old Testament. The primary salvation story in the Old Testament is the Exodus story.
Right.
It is the people being released from bondage to Egypt, and God promising that there will be a place that I have for you that you are going to be. Now, in that we see, obviously, we are oppressed by sin, no question about that. The salvation experience of being led out to the journey of faith that takes us through the waters, and eventually we arise in the promised land. But that whole process that the scriptures talk about, the blood of the Lamb, it is the doorpost. It really has its roots in that Old Testament story. But then there's a New Testament story around the word. It's in Greek, it's sozo, S-O-Z-O. And it really means to be saved from illness, saved from sickness, to be saved from isolation. It is a word that has so much more ramifications than just being saved from sin.
Well, it's about being made whole.
It is.
And so if you think about, and it's also about becoming fully human. And the way that some of us grew up and have been taught is that our humanity is a bad thing. And we'd often use that as an excuse when we did something horrible. Well, I'm only human. Mm-hmm. Well, to be human is to be created in the image of God, that God proclaims that image is very good. Mm-hmm. That creation is very good. It's about the restoration of our humanity. Now, sin damages our humanity, no doubt about it. It skews our vision, it hurts our lives, and depending on the level of engagement with destructive elements, the more damaged we can become. And sin's a real thing. And at the heart of it, sin means the New Testament understanding of sin is missing the mark. It's an archery term. It means that you're off course.
If you're shooting at a goal with a ball, you don't hit.
Right. Yeah, kind of like my short game. You've watched me play golf. It's not good. What you intend doesn't happen because you're off course. And so the work of Christ then, in that kind of view, is to provide course correction, to show us what a real human being looks like, a fully authentic, sin-free human being looks like. And that's and if you look at who Jesus is and who we are, then we get an understanding of how much we've missed that mark. But so what Jesus comes to do is, yes, he does die for the forgiveness of sins. He says that going into that night. Here, drink of this, all of you. This is the cup of the new covenant. It's poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. So there is that element there, but it's about our life and about the life we live in Jesus that brings about a transformation into the very likeness of Christ. And it also gives us over to the freedom of trusting Jesus completely with the future.
Well, it goes going back to that analogy of the Passover of the people of Israel. It is a journey. It's not a destination, nor is it, okay, I was saved on such and such moment. Every time the word in the New Testament is used, salvation, it is a process, not a one moment in time completion.
It can be for some. I think there are elements in their stories of people who've experienced God in such a dramatic way that they mark that. But it can also be the beginning of the journey. It's always the beginning of the journey. But
it's an important step along the journey.
Some people have more dramatic moments where they come to Christ than others. For instance, I could say in my own life, I grew up in the church. I grew up with my mom praying for me aloud and reading my brothers and I scriptures. So I never had a time where I felt an absence of God. And I know throughout my life, I've had times where I needed to certainly dig deeper, where I've come to a better realization of God. I've had moments where I felt God more assuredly than others, but I never had that 180-degree change in direction the way that, say, the Apostle Saul had when he became the Apostle Paul. And I often beat myself up for that and wonder, well, am I really Have I found salvation? Because I don't have that light switch moment. And sometimes salvation can look like a light switch moment, but for what I found for so many people I've been in ministry with, and two, is that salvation sometimes looks a lot more like it becoming dawn.
Yeah. Well, we'll put the link to this N.T. Wright video. Again, N.T. Wright is a real Orthodox scholar, so you're in good hands here. We trust N.T. Wright's viewpoint. So we'll put that on here, and I hope it at least sparks a conversation in you about salvation.
Think about it. Well, I think we need to. We'll follow up and continue this conversation with our podcast tomorrow.
Yeah. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.